Overbearing HR targets you. Subtle revenge ensues extended and combined. I never thought I'd be afraid of an email notification. Not the loud kind of fear, no racing heart or cold sweats. Just that quiet tightening in your chest when you see a name in your inbox and already know the message won't make your day better. Before Michelle arrived, HR barely crossed my mind. They processed paperwork, organized compliance training, sent the occasional reminder about leave balances. They existed in the background where they belonged. Michelle in the background. She arrived on a Monday morning with a reputation already attached to her name. Someone in accounting whispered that she'd cleaned house at her previous company. Someone else said she'd been brought in specifically to tighten things up. She was polite, friendly, even. Always smiling, but her eyes didn't smile. From the beginning, she asked a lot of questions. Not curious ones, evaluative ones. She watched how people spoke in meetings, took notes during casual conversations, asked managers about team dynamics in ways that felt stratégique. Within her first month, small changes began appearing. New reporting templates, mandatory check-ins, policy reminders that no one remembered agreeing to. People grumbled, but mostly complied. It didn't feel worth pushing back. I stayed out of it. I'd been with the company for nearly 6 years. Première que nous m'y rôle, que nous m'y value and deliver. My performance reviews were consistently strong. I didn't socialize excessively, didn't gossip, didn't complain, which, in hindsight, might have been why Michelle noticed me. The first email came on a Wednesday afternoon. Subject line, quick clarification, she asked, why I'd phrased a request to a colleague the way I had. Said the wording could potentially be interpreted as directive rather than collaborative. I reread the message 3 times. It was a standard, polite request, no trench, from droits et descends before. Still, I replied calmly, thanked her for the feedback, said I'd pay the next week, another mail. This one referenced my login times. Apparently, logging in earlier than scheduled, even to get a head start, could be misaligned with expected working patterns. Then came the meeting invites. Informal check-in, touch base, quick chat, each one followed the same pattern. Michelle would smile, ask open-ended questions, and type constantly while I spoke. How are you feeling about your workload lately? Do you feel supported by your manager? Have you ever felt frustrated by team processes? They felt like traps, but I didn't know why yet. A few days after one of these chats, my manager called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable. HR raised some concerns, he said carefully, nothing serious. Just patterns. Apparently, Michelle had flagged that I might be at risk of burnout, that I sometimes took on too much responsibility, that I could benefit from additional structure. I left the meeting unsettled. I hadn't complained. I hadn't asked for help. And yet, a narrative was being built around me, one I hadn't agreed to. From that point on, the scrutiny intensified. Michelle began requesting copies of my work schedules, asking to be looped into project updates, commenting on meeting notes. If I spoke confidently, it was logged as assertive. If I disagreed with someone, it was potential conflict. If I kept my head down, it was disengagement risk. It didn't matter what I did, it could be reframed. What bothered me most wasn't the pressure, it was the isolation. Colleagues started behaving differently around me. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. People hesitated before ceasing me on emails, like association alone might draw attention. Michelle never said anything openly negative about me. She didn't need to. Her documentation did the work for her. For a brief moment, I considered fighting back directly, confronting her in one of those meetings, demanding specifics, asking why I was being targeted. But then I watched her do the same thing to someone else, a junior team member who tried to challenge her. Within weeks, that person was on a performance improvement plan. That's when I realized something crucial. Michelle didn't operate emotionally, she operated procedurally. So, if I wanted to survive and win, I needed to speak her language. I started with policy, not just studying it. Sehr cher Manual de Gamework, the compliance charter, the internal audit guidelines most people never bothered reading, and slowly a pattern emerged. Michelle was obsessed with enforcing rules, but careless about process. She relied on authority rather than approval, assumed compliance rather than confirming it, gave verbal instructions that weren't backed by policy, small things, easy to miss. So I started doing something very simple. Première documented. Every meeting ended with a follow-up email summarizing what was discussed. Every instruction was confirmed in writing. Every informal request was politely clarified. Just confirming my understanding per our conversation. Happy to proceed once aligned. Michelle never objected. If anything, she seemed pleased, probably thought I was falling in line. Then she got ambitious. She launched a new compliance initiative, mandatory weekly reporting from multiple departments. No consultation with legal, no formal rollout, just an email announcing it as policy. Most people complied immediately. I didn't refuse. I didn't complain. I asked a question. Hi, Michelle. Just checking. Can you point me to the policy amendment or legal sign-off for this new requirement? Want to ensure I'm aligned. Her reply came fast. This is covered under existing frameworks. It wasn't, and I knew it. So I forwarded the exchange to legal compliance, calmly, politely, copying my manager. Within hours, legal responded. The initiative was paused pending review. That review uncovered more than just one issue. Unapproved processes, improper documentation, overreach beyond role authority. But what surprised me most wasn't how quickly the review escalated. It was how many people quietly came forward once it started. At first, the investigation felt contained. A few emails. A couple of calendar blocks marked HR review confidential, but then I noticed managers cancelling meetings, closing office doors, lowering their Officialsnamn. One afternoon, a colleague from finance stopped by my desk under the pretense of asking about a spreadsheet. She leaned closer and whispered, "You too, right?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She nodded slowly, like that was confirmation enough. Over the following days, similar conversations happened again and again. A project lead who'd been pressured into changing performance notes. Teamsverwebbing reaction. Someone else who'd had a casual conversation documented as a formal warning without their knowledge. None of it was explosive on its own. But together, it painted a picture. Michelle hadn't just been enforcing rules, she'd been shaping narratives. Quietly, carefully, always with plausible deniability. She relied on the fact that most people wouldn't challenge HR, and even fewer would document interactions the way she did. Except now, they were. Legal began requesting timelines. Email chains, meeting notes, decision rationales. And suddenly, Michelle's favorite tactic, verbal guidance, became her biggest liability. She struggled to explain why certain instructions had never been formalized, why some actions bypassed approval, why similar situations had been handled differently across teams. Her emails changed tone, the confidence gave way to defensiveness. The warmth was replaced by clipped professionalism. Where she once responded within minutes, replies now took hours, sometimes days. She stopped scheduling informal catch-ups. When I passed her in the hallway one morning, she smiled out of reflex, then seemed to remember herself and looked away. The power shift was subtle, but unmistakable. Managers who once deferred to her began pushing back, asking for clarification, requesting written justification. Copying legal should be finchelsing before she in my head and sees less. When challenged, she deferred. When asked for confirmation, she said she'd circle back. The rules she once wielded effortlessly were now being applied to her. And the irony wasn't lost on anyone. At one point, she sent out a department-wide email reminding everyone about proper documentation standards. Legal replied all. They thanked her for the reminder and attached updated documentation requirements for HR-led initiatives. The silence that followed was loud. Weeks passed before the reassignment was announced. During that time, Michelle existed in a kind of professional limbo. Still present, still polite, but stripped of influence. No more directives, no more scrutiny, no more quiet pressure. And when the announcement finally came, it was framed positively. A strategic shift, a new focus area, but everyone understood what it really was. Michelle hadn't been fired. She'd been neutralized. The email stopped. The meeting stopped, and during my next performance review, my manager smiled. Honestly, he said, you handled a difficult situation incredibly well. Michelle avoided eye contact after that. And as I sat at my desk that afternoon, watching the office slowly return to its old rhythm, I realized something else. I hadn't just protected myself. By refusing to react emotionally, by documenting, instead of confronting, I'd exposed a pattern that had affected far more people than just me. Sometimes revenge isn't about watching someone fall. Sometimes it's about stepping aside and letting the truth walk into the room on its own. Story 2. A micromanaging boss pushes too far and learns humility, full expanded version. I always thought I knew my limits. After 10 years in corporate operations, I developed a rhythm, a combination of efficiency, diligence, and patience that let me get through days that would have crushed someone less steady. And then came Alan. Alan was my new manager. He had the charm of someone who thought he was smarter than everyone in the room, and the subtle cruelty of someone who enjoyed reminding you of it. At first, I tried to see the positives. He was ambitious, organized, charismatic in meetings. But it didn't take long to realize that he didn't delegate, he monitored. Every task, every decision, every minor choice I made was scrutinized with surgical precision. I remember the first sign of trouble vividly. It was a Monday morning, bright and early. I had just finished my first cup of coffee and logged into my project dashboard when Alan appeared at my desk, unannounced, leaning slightly over my screen. "Good morning," he said cheerfully, though his eyes scanned my workflow like a hawk. "I noticed you opened the Henderson report late last week. Why did it take until Friday afternoon? Were you overwhelmed?" I blinked. "No, I just prioritized the client deliverables. Henderson isn't due until next week." He leaned closer. "I understand deadlines, but I like to see the process in real time. Could you update me every step moving forward? Even small changes, just email me or ping me on Teams." I nodded politely. "Sûr, allons." That was the beginning. Over the next weeks, his checking in grew into daily micromanagement rituals. If I wrote an email, he wanted to approve it before sending. If I prepared a report, he wanted to see preliminary drafts. Even something as mundane as my calendar entries became fodder for review. Why schedule a 2:00 meeting with finance? Couldn't you do it at 1:45? It's more efficient. It wasn't just inconvenient, it was exhausting. Every decision felt like it carried consequences I hadn't agreed to. And because he framed everything with a smile and a positive comment, "I'm just helping you grow," complaining felt absurd. I could have resigned. I could have gone to HR. I could have spent hours arguing with him. But I realized that would play exactly into his hands. Alan thrived on conflict. He enjoyed demonstrating his superiority. So I decided to fight him differently, quietly, strategically. Step 1. Document everything. I kept meticulous notes. Every instruction he gave, every suggestion, every request for updates. I didn't argue. I didn't push back. I simply wrote down everything. Emails, screenshots, chat logs. Even my casual verbal exchanges. Step 2. Predictable compliance. I began following his instructions exactly as stated, but with the subtle twist of literal adherence. If he said, "Update me on all changes in real time," I sent hourly emails with trivial updates, edited paragraph 3 of the Henderson report. No other changes. Moved a data point from column C to column D, screenshot attached. Alan's emails of encouragement began to show slight frustration. "Thanks, but don't spend too much time on minutia." He wrote, but I didn't stop. The updates continued, precise and exhaustive. Step 3. Strategic transparency. Every time he asked for something verbally, I repeated it back in writing, just to confirm our conversation. "You asked me to, correct?" It made it impossible for him to contradict me without looking petty. It also built a paper trail I knew I could use if needed. Week passed. Alan grew more controlling, yet simultaneously more anxious. His usual confidence was tempered by a constant awareness that I was tracking everything. What he didn't realize was that every minor oversight he tried to press me on now worked against him. Then came the big client project, the one Alan was most invested in. He insisted on controlling the deliverables entirely. I was allowed to execute tasks only under his direction, but he refused to provide clear timelines. He micromanaged the team, assigning work in overlapping tasks that made no sense, and frequently changed priorities midday. The team was stressed, productivity suffered, and yet he refused to notice, focused entirely on monitoring me personally. I decided it was time to escalate, quietly, carefully. I compiled every email, every chat, every request he had made regarding the project. I documented the shifting priorities, the unclear deadlines, the conflicting instructions. Then I approached our internal audit team, framing the situation as a concern for project efficiency, risk management, and client satisfaction. I didn't say, "My manager is unreasonable." I said, "The current process is causing inefficiencies that might affect the client." Here is the full documentation. Audit agreed to review. Meanwhile, Alan continued his behavior. He demanded daily updates from the team. He sent last-minute meeting invites. He questioned colleagues' work without context. And all of it, unknowingly, was feeding my case. 2 weeks later, the internal audit report came back. The findings were clear. Project timelines had been mismanaged due to overlapping and conflicting instructions. Team morale had declined, and communication protocols had not been followed by management. Alan was summoned for a meeting with the directors. He tried to charm them, he tried to argue. He tried to deflect blame onto the team, but the documentation was irrefutable. Every claim he made was contradicted by emails, notes, and timelines. By the end of the week, Alan was instructed to attend leadership training, a humbling but not punitive reassignment. His responsibilities were reduced, and he was no longer directly managing high-stakes projects without oversight. The weeks leading up to that decision had been excruciating. Every morning, Alan would hover over the project board, checking who updated what last. If I spoke to a colleague in the break room, he wanted details. Which topic did you discuss? What was decided? Emails that normally took 5 minutes suddenly consumed half an hour because every line was scrutinized. Even small mistakes became magnified. A spreadsheet formatting error, something that would have gone unnoticed under any other manager, earned a pointed. Slack message. Attention to detail is crucial. Please revise and resubmit. I didn't argue, but I logged it. Each incident became part of the unfolding story, quietly stacking up, without confrontation. Colleagues began to notice. The quiet nods, the quick glances, the whispered discussions at desks, they were subtly signaling. We see what's happening. That gave me another advantage. I wasn't isolated. I was aware. The team was already quietly helping me create an accurate picture of the chaos, even if they didn't know it. The day audit visited the office. Alan was at his desk. Unaware that the team had shared screenshots, emails, and timelines with me ahead of time, he didn't suspect a thing. Every question asked by the auditors I could answer calmly, presenting facts without emotion. Each inconsistency in his narrative was easy to highlight because it was already documented. He began to sweat subtly, the confidence he projected to the rest of the office starting to crack. By the end of that week, he was stripped of authority on critical projects. His emails became cautious, measured, and almost apologetic in tone. The team, once under siege, began to breathe again. And I watched quietly, satisfied that careful patience had done more than confrontation ever could the départ. I never had to raise my voice. I never had to accuse him directly. I simply let the facts speak for themselves, documented meticulously, and followed his instructions to the letter with a little literalism and careful patience. By the time he returned from leadership training, the office dynamic had shifted. people were willing to speak up. Decisions were challenged respectfully. And Alan had learned the hard way that micromanaging through intimidation only works until someone quietly plays by the rules better than you do. I learned an important lesson from that experience. You don't beat overbearing bosses by shouting. You beat them by being smarter, calmer, and patient enough to let the truth do the talking. Sometimes the quietest resistance is the most effective. And sometimes the universe, aided by careful documentation, teaches lessons in humility that even the loudest, most controlling boss can't ignore.